so welcome to part 2 of the 3D printed helmet build. So what we're doing now is we are welding up the separate pieces that we printed. So as you can see, first up we're gonna do is we're gonna sand up the edges where we're gonna apply the super glue. And as you can see, I am applying super glue first on the parts where we are going to combine the pieces together. And after you've put super glue, you just go ahead and put the pieces together. As you can see, I am just clearly securing and making sure that the pieces are aligned and that they are touching together. And sanding really helps the glue cure faster and attach better to the plastic or the PLA. And then this is completely optional, but as you can see, I used a soldering iron to sort of weld the pieces together, just to make sure that the pieces don't fall off. As I'm basically melting the PLA and welding them together, so that's completely optional, but for me that's a really good way of combining the pieces together. And then after you're done with that, just go over and finish the rest of the helmet. As you can see, again, I am applying super glue to the top part of the helmet because after that we are going to attach the dome or the top part of the helmet. And then again, just make sure that everything is aligned. Reapply some glue if you have to, and then sand it off when it's needed, so the glue adheres properly. So there you go. And then again, just repeat the process. Go ahead and take your soldering iron and just weld the pieces together, and just melt the plastic. And you guys really have to be very careful because sometimes it could melt the plastic. So just be careful in using the soldering iron and be careful in using it and welding the pieces. But so far, after everything is done, looking good so far, as you can see there. So I'm just going over the seams. Oh, it also helps filling up the seams. So there we go, that's our helmet. Alright guys, so here is the helmet. We've put all the pieces together to make it one full helmet, so as you can see. And then now we move on to the very labor intensive part of this build, which is coating this with body fillers. So people use Bondo, people use wood filler, but personally I use Polytough. It's a type of polyester body filler, mainly because Bondo isn't available here locally. So it's very similar to Bondo. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna apply it all over the helmet and wait for it to harden in just a few minutes. And then after that is we are going to sand the filler and make everything smooth, and then move over to priming. Alright, so guys, here we are. As you can see, I am putting the body filler all over the helmet. I am applying it with my fingers. Fair warning guys, if you guys have an alternate way of doing it, go ahead and do it with gloves or with a brush or whatever. I don't recommend you guys using your hand because it gets everywhere and it hardens really quickly. So as you can see, I'm just putting the body filler all over the helmet where I think is necessary. It's best to apply just very thin layers of the body filler, because if you apply too much, it's going to create like a new layer and it's going to be hard to sand off. And like I said, this is a very labor intensive process. So yeah, just be careful on applying. And as you can see, after everything is done, after you're finished applying all the body filler, the helmet is going to look like that. And then we are gonna move on to sanding. Alright guys, so here we are. As you can see, I started already sanding up the pieces. So what you're gonna do is You are gonna need about, well, I start off with a 60 grit sandpaper, only because the body filler that I'm using is a bit, it's too hard compared to Bondo. But if you are using Bondo, you can start with about 120 to 150 sandpaper and then just go over and sand all the parts that you needed to sand. But right now, as you can see here, I start off with 60 grit sandpaper, and then after I'm done with the helmet, with all the nitty-gritty parts, or with the first layer, I am gonna move on to 120 or 150 grit sandpaper. So as you can see here, I'm just sanding the parts of the helmet that needs to be sanded off, basically everywhere. Just try as best as you can to get into the nitty-gritty details of the helmet. Obviously there are some corners and some parts that's gonna be hard to reach, but you're just gonna have to do your best to sand all the parts. Probably the easiest would be the dome, and then the face of the helmet, and then the most difficult parts would be those with edges, or those that needs to be sanded, such as the cheeks, the insides, and everything. So this is really a labor intensive process. If you have an orbital sander, the process is gonna take much quicker. It's gonna be easier, but unfortunately I don't have an orbital sander, so I'm just gonna have to make do with sandpaper. So yep, I'm still here with the dome because that's one of the most important parts that you need to sand off. So after you're done sanding the dome, you go ahead and move over to the face. It's really up to you how you're gonna do this whole process. What's important is that you sand down all the rough parts of the helmet, because if you don't, then that's going to be very clear, or it's going to show up in the final product, and we don't really want that to happen. We have to make sure that this build comes out real nice, real smooth, and that there are no print lines or whatsoever. So after you're done sanding everything down, after you're done with the first layer, for me, what I did is I went over and got my rotary tool, and then went over the parts where a sandpaper couldn't reach it. So as you can see right here, I'm just cleaning off the edges right there, sanding off the parts that need to be sanded down that I really couldn't reach with a sandpaper. So having a rotary tool really helps. I didn't have a rotary tool before, so when I worked on my first 3D printed helmets, that was really difficult. But right now, fortunately, I was able to get a rotary tool, which a friend lent to me. So yeah, so here we are, we're just sanding over the top using the rotary tool, making sure that everything is nice and even. This also, just, you guys really have to be careful with the rotary tool as well, because sometimes you sand too much and it really removes the body filler. So you gotta be careful, and you gotta, you know, just take your time with it. Don't rush it when you're using a rotary tool and everything. And also guys, when you are using a rotary tool, make sure that you are wearing a respirator. Don't be like me. Wear a respirator, because the body filler gets everywhere, especially the dust. It's really dangerous. If you inhale that stuff, it's a chemical, and it's very dangerous to your lungs. So please wear a respirator. Don't be like me, or at least wear a mask or a face shield when you guys are in the sanding process in doing 3D printed helmet. Alright guys, so after you're all done sanding, congratulations, you're almost done with the build. Not really almost done. We are about 60% with this whole build process. So now, as you can see, what we're doing now is we are spraying our first layer of primer. That is very important before we go over to the paint. priming is very, very important. So as you can see, here I am, I'm just spraying very thin layers of my gray primer over the helmet, and then just waiting for it to dry, and then spraying again additional coats of primer. I think overall you are gonna need at least about probably 3, 4, or 5 layers of primer overall before you're done with this whole process. This is just to make sure that everything is just smooth, everything is just looking good and everything. So just make sure you go ahead and do that. So as you can see, I'm just spraying it lightly and everything. And again, guys, I cannot remind you enough, but please, when you are doing this process, wear a respirator. Don't be like me. Don't be YOLO or what. But yeah, because you're basically inhaling chemical fumes. So yeah. So here I am just finishing off primer, and then we're gonna move over to another process. Alright guys, so here is a process that is completely optional for you guys, but for me personally, I think it really helps with smoothing out the build and helping everything real nice and smooth. So what you're gonna do is, after you're done with your primer, after you're done priming your helmet, is you are going to wet sand. So basically, wet sanding is well, it is what it is. You put a little bit of, you wet up your helmet or your build or whatever it is that you're sanding, and then just go over it with sandpaper. So I am using here 350 grit sandpaper. So wet sanding really helps smooth everything out. So you're just gonna go ahead and just go over the whole helmet with that process and make sure that everything is nice and smooth. And then right after, you're gonna go ahead and move over to another coat of primer. So after that one coat of primer, we are now gonna go to base painting the helmet. So after you're done with the whole wet sanding process, and you've applied your final coat of primer, so here we are going to finally put the base paint, which is color white. So I'm just using a white acrylic spray paint here, so I'm just spraying it all over the helmet, just very thin layers. So again, you're gonna work on this coat by coat. It's up to you. I think I only did like 3 layers probably, just 3 layers of white base coat, and then yeah, so just make sure you get all the sides right there, all the nooks and crannies of the helmet. Just always double check when you're painting all the parts that you might have missed on. Just go over it again and again, and just go over it lightly, and then just do coat on coat after coat of white paint. So after you're done painting your helmet or applying the base coat, just let it cure at least 3 days at least, or a week. It's up to you. But after it's done curing, you can go over and do the detailing and everything. So yeah, so this is it for now for the second part of the build. The next part of the build is about I'm gonna show you guys about how I put the details on the helmet and stuff like that, and show you guys the final end product of the helmet. So I'll see you guys then.